Welcome to the Political Ferret Show. New content will be uploaded every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you like this kind of content, consider becoming a Patreon and help with just $1 a month to make the change possible. Since Gamergate, I would say that the gaming community established itself as a political factor, and people noticed that. So what we gonna do today, we discuss culture and diversity for gamers in gamer terms, because, well, this will be funny. The first thing we have to discuss and find out is that humans are not really sheeps. We are not these nice cuddly thingies that run around a whole day and think about what grass we can feed. We are the apex predator of this very planet. And this is not something new. This is not the fact since we have guns. This is the fact for a long time right now. So, we are the apex predator. We are the most dangerous hunter on this planet. We are the most dangerous animal on this planet. We are the most dangerous thing on this very planet. So let's talk about diversity for a start. Diversity, especially, I would say everywhere, is not per se a stupid thing. Quite the contrary, it is a good thing, because when you have a lot of diversity, you can do different things. But, and this is the interesting thing, this is a question of in what situation you are in this very moment. For example, when you have a problem, when you have play a strategy game, and you can be attacked from the ground, from the air, and from the water, you have to do something in all the fronts. It makes no sense whatsoever to just start to produce a lot of ground units when you get pushed from the sea. You have to use your diversity, you have to fight different kinds of problems in the same moment. You have to react on all these things. On the other hand, when it is possible to solve the whole thing with just one unit, you would do this. Quite famously, the Circ Rush. You have one unit and one unit alone that makes it possible to crush your enemy. In these cases, you do not need diversity. Quite the opposite. Diversity in this case becomes a weakness. So to put it bluntly, when you have only one kind of problem, diversity brings nothing. Quite the opposite. You need all your people to be able to face this one problem. On the other hand, when you have a lot of different problems, you need different people to solve these problems, because when you have a different kind of problems, when you have a lot of different problems and you only have the same people who try to tackle that with the same kind of strategy, you will fail. So what we want is that we have a lot of questions, problems, challenges, and we need the right people to deal with these challenges. If you have a lot of these problems, a diversity of problems, you need a diversity of people. And this is something that is to a large degree true for all industrial nations. Where is it not true? Well, pretty much when life is all the time the same sucky thing, or all the time the same paradise. When you have just to get up in the morning, go to the next tree, pick a fruit, eat it, and sleep the rest of the day as it would be in paradise, then you do not have to need diversity. It makes no sense. You do not need that. Everybody can do whatever he wants, but diversity is not needed. It is not a benefit. On the other hand, if you live in the desert and there is absolutely nothing than your camel you can take care of, then also diversity makes not a lot of sense. So what does this mean in our reality? When you have, as we had in Europe, a very harsh winter and summers that you had to use to survive the winter, you then need diversity, and you evolve diversity from within your own culture. You do not have to import other diversity things, although it makes sense that we imported some things. One example is knitting. Knitting is an example that was imported from the Middle East into Europe, and Europe used it extensively to this very day, I would argue. So So why the whole thing? Because this leads then to a situation where you can specialize. You specialize on one thing to create another thing, and you then have a high degree of interdependencies, but also a lot of products that go far beyond products that one single being could produce. This means, on the other hand, that different places in the world would create different cultures. This means that people who live in the woods, even though one people live hundreds of kilometers somewhere else, people in the woods would live in a more or less kind of similar way. The same is true for people in the desert. People in the desert will live to a certain degree a very similar way and kind of life as people in other deserts on complete different continents live. The same is true for mountain people. So the thing is that if we now say all the mountain people are completely alike, this is absolutely not true, because no mountain is the same thing as the other mountain, and you can go down very, very far and we'll see that a lot of people on mountains that are close together have different cultures. But in the end, they are mountain cultures, and they have more in common with other mountain cultures than they have with the people in the wood cultures. So you can then say, okay, so all the mountain people should form a nation. No, this is also silly. What we have to discuss now when we go beyond the cultures is how our nations are pretty much put together. And they are put together by bigger army diplomacy. Our nations are formed by people who had weapons to force people into their empire and out of other empires. The idea of nations after the French Revolutions was pretty much the idea that you say, okay, we go away from that. It is not that people have to live in the same nation just because they are ruled by the same king. We just watch where people have similarly cultures, and similarly cultures should live together. This can be realized to a certain degree, but not exactly. Even a little state like Austria has so many different cultures within it, and a lot of these cultures do not like each other, do not even understand each other to a certain degree. But this is what we have. Right now, all our nations are based on bigger army diplomacy and not based on cultural similarity. When Americans come up and say, oh, America should be cultural homogeneous, this is not really possible, and it makes sense to a certain degree because it makes sense to work together to hold off the evil hordes that lurk outside of our borders. So people naturally, although if they are culturally different, but close enough together, which means in our reality most basically that they speak the same language, they will form alliances, and these alliances will then result into nations that are used to protect each other against other nations. This is a point that I brought up again and again and again against the anarchists, because this is the thing. Nations had to do one thing very, very good, and this is defend against other nations. Except, of course, when you are French, then this is only true to a certain degree. So now we have to start about culture and what culture really is, because culture is not just silly clothings. One of the most important things that culture does is it regulates our sexuality to a certain degree. What do I mean with that? Well, let's start with the obvious and easy one, with the male sexuality. What males find good in women is pretty much universal on the whole planet. It ends up pretty much in a woman that is able to bring your child through the winter. That's all. So this was pretty much the easy part. There is also a cultural aspect in that, but it is not as big as with the women's. With women's it is somewhat different. If you do not interfere cultural wise and let women choose their males, they will end up pretty much at people who have a considerable amount of strength and a lot of endurance. Because we used endurance to kill our prey. As I said before, we are the apex predator of this very planet, and we used to hunt in a fashion that we just run behind the animals we wanted to eat until they collapsed. So this natural urge to go with that and go with that, these characteristics is still there. This is the reason why women pretty much watch the bottom of a male, because this gives you some information about endurance, and this used to be a very, very important trait in a male back in the day. Of course, they pretty much know that guys who are not good in anything, they are out of the question. You do not really need culture for that, but the interesting thing is what is with the people who are very intelligent or very strong. When you now live in a situation where strength is more important than endurance, and intelligence is also quite important, culture will dictate pretty much in the form of the parents who say, oh no, do not take this guy with the hot butt, take this guy with the strong arms, because we in our culture need people with strong arms. Then you will have these traits in your children, and this is a good thing because strength determines money, power and everything in our culture. On the other hand, if you are a culture who cultivates intelligence, you can say take the clever guy, take this one, take the good trader, for example, take the one who can tell great stories, take the one who can remember all the songs because this shows intelligence, and so on. So you had different cultures based on their geography and the needs, which dictated to the women which males are desirable. Right now we see in the West a little bit a run back to the roots, because long-lasting families diminished to a certain degree. On the other hand, we see also a recurrence of culture, and we see that people say nowadays back again to the daughters, take this guy, he's a better choice long term, and think long term. So for example, if there is a culture that started 5,000 years ago with breeding intelligence, they will have a more intelligent gene pool. This was not always a benefit for them, because most of our time endurance and strength and everything else is more important than intelligence. But there are tribes around who focused pretty much on intelligence, and they are therefore, because they breeded this out, more intelligent. On the other hand, you have branches of the human species who are still very good in endurance, in running very fast. Again, this is a thing of breeding. It is, so people will then say, oh, you talk about eugenics. No, eugenics is more or less a modern concept. I talk about when people said, okay, what do we need right now? And this led to a situation where those families who cultivated their culture of saying marry always the most intelligent guy, these families will have become more and more and more intelligent. This is the cultural factor that is very important, and this is quite overseen in our time. So as we go back, the different cultures had different amounts of success. So those people who went with endurance did not very good in the time of the Industrial Revolution. On the other side, those people who went with intelligence did very well. But for a quite long time, as I said before, bigger army diplomacy was the thing to go. So we had empires, and different people were in different structures, different empires ruled by different kings. After the French Revolution, people came up with the idea to say, okay, we sort ourselves based on culture. And so you have all the French speakers in one land, all the German speakers in one land, and so on and so on. So the diversity was reduced. But since they all had the same culture, it means that also the challenges were reduced. For example, Austria had a lot of people who were able to sail ships. We do not have access to a coastline anymore, we do not have real ships. So this thing went away. So also our need for sailors went away. When you focus on the culture that is already there, you reduce not only the diversity, you reduce also the amount of questions and of problems to a lower degree. Which means when you have smaller states, you have less different problems. But what do you do when you form a culture, a nation, whatever, in a region that is very, very, very different in geography, in needs, and so on? Well, you end up with a situation that you have to put your people with force together, and this works best when you have an external enemy, and it is pretty much the only way to make this happen. But when you then have pretty much a situation of war, when two people who are diverse in nature because they interchange to a certain degree and they become enemies in a war, the first thing that happens is that people run to the other side and change the side to where they are able to win. In one way or another, of course, often these people who are just different get killed, get thrown out, whatever. But in a time of conflict, people, groups, nations, and so on will themselves homogenize. And this does not always mean mass murder. It often means that people go where they are wanted and leave where they are not wanted anymore. So what keeps these people together? Well, to the time of the French Revolution it was pretty much language, because people then pointed out that language and culture is pretty much the same thing. If you have the same language, you have the same culture. I would not really agree to that, and I would say this idea of the classical nation is somewhat outdated. What really holds us together is the rules and laws that define how we live. And as I stated before in different other videos, the rules came out of the culture. The rules are just a formulation of what people already did, and people get down and codified this into rules and then later into laws. This is important to understand. Rules and laws are the thing that holds us together and that makes it possible that we cooperate. And talking about cooperation, we have to talk about tribalism. Tribalism, as I pointed out in another video, is on a way smaller scale than nationalism. You have to know the people to a certain degree and you have to coordinate, which means that you have to accept somebody as leader. For example, imagine a game where there are two sides. On the one side there is only a commander and he commands all the units. On the other side, every unit is commanded by one person. If you are in a tactical situation, I would say that people where every unit can do whatever they want, they are on a slight advantage. On the other hand, if you are the commander, you have always the bigger picture in mind. You understand the strategy. You can say, okay, I hold my forces back until some people came over and I crash them, and then I go over and kill them all. And I would really love to see a game like this, and I would say I saw games like this, especially in Battlefield 2. We saw some very good examples where very capable leaders with very capable groups were very successful compared with a lot of lone wolves. These lone wolves, for a degree, don't even got off of their spawn points, because when you have a good coordination and people who are able to follow orders, you are on a very massive advantage against a lot of individuals. And this is a problem. I know this is a problem because it talks against individualism, against anarchy, and is pretty much for an idea of hard hierarchies and so on. But the thing is, it works, and you do not have to like it. The thing is just, it works, and it works is often just enough. So the whole question about culture and diversity boils exactly down to that. Culture defines what we should do, what laws we should abide, what things we should do, what mates we should take in our beds. Culture defines these things, and cultures are different because the needs of the places where these cultures did evolve from were differently. Geography defines culture, culture defines the people. Diversity is a good thing if you have a diversity of problems. Do you want to have a diversity of problems? I do not think so. If you are a group and you can reduce the amount of problems, you will do so. So the idea is that if you have smaller groups, smaller nations, I talk about something in the size of city-states, then you have not a lot of problems and you do not need a lot of diversity, and this itself is then a strength when you do not have a lot of problem. On the other hand, if you have a lot of problems, diversity makes sense if you take in a lot of diversity, there will come a lot of problems with that automatically. So tell me what you think about this in the comment section. Like, share and subscribe. Consider going over to Patreon and have a wonderful day.